Are you wondering if you're going to survive triple feeding, or are you at the point where you are ready to call it quits because you are at your end? Then this video is for you because I'm about to go over 2 alternatives to triple feeding that you can do to still try to increase stimulation, to increase your supply and milk production, but to cut out some of your time in the whole process of the triple feeding nightmare. My name is Victoria. I am a certified lactation educator, but I'm also a low milk supply mom, which means I have been in your shoes. So first, I wanted to go over your very first option you have, and that is using what's known as a Medela supplemental nursing system, also abbreviated as an SNS. So this device is something you can wear. Essentially, you put it around your neck, right? You can shorten the length of the cord around, and what this allows you to do is it allows you to put the supplement, if you know how much supplement you need to be providing in advance, so you have it in the bottle already ready to go. Okay, it's got markings on the side, and you're able to measure out what you need, and it has these 2 tubes that essentially, I'm gonna grab my demo. When you are breastfeeding, you would line it up on your breast, and it comes, the one that I got comes with just a little bit of medical tape, but essentially it's just tape that's okay to put on your skin, and you would just tape on a little piece onto the side of your breast, and it pins the tube in place. So what you can do is have both of these secured before you start your feeding, and then you're able to take the 3-step process of triple feeding, which is breastfeed, supplement, and pump. You're able to condense it into doing the breastfeeding and supplementing at the same time while baby is nursing at the breast. So these tubes are locked into place, and when you release them from the little notch that is on them, like that, it will allow the milk to flow, or like I said, formula, donor milk, whatever you're supplementing with. So that is one thing that you can do, and this will cut out time because you're now able to do, like I said, those 2 steps in one, and then you would afterwards pump when you're done doing this. I did this one a lot. I would say I alternated between triple feeding traditionally, the whole 3-step process, and using the Medela SNS. And it worked really well. There's a learning curve, okay? That's the downside, I will say. There's a learning curve, but honestly, there's a learning curve to breastfeeding too, right? Like, it's not always easy right out the gate. So it's something that I would say definitely dabble with it if you want to. They do have a smaller size, but if you are in a position where you just don't really know how long you might be having a triple feed for, I would just get the bigger one to begin with, because the smaller size, it only goes up to 80 milliliters, which is just over 2 ounces. And so it really depends obviously also on your supply, like how much you do or don't have. But this is something that I would recommend, and I will link below in case you are interested in seeing where you can grab it. The second alternative that I have is for you to do what's called parallel pumping. Parallel pumping is essentially when you are using an electric pump simultaneously while breastfeeding on one side. So what you would do, and this really is handy with a hands-free pumping bra. So my hands-free pumping bra I have here also will be linked below. This one is my favorite. This one it wraps around, it zips up in the front, so it's super easy. But the material right here in the front has some folds that allows you to secure a flange for a pump inside of. So that way it can hold it in place like such, okay? And that way you can have your hands free to do whatever you need to do while you're pumping. So what you would do with this to do parallel pumping is you would have this wrapped around you, but then on one side it would be lined up with your breast in the flange, okay? And then the other side, I would just have this, since it is something that you can wrap around your body, I would actually tuck this whole other side that doesn't have the flange in it underneath your breast, okay? So your breast is sitting on top, and then your flange is on the side, right? So that way you're able to parallel pump, which is when you are breastfeeding on one side with your baby, and then you're pumping on the other side at the same time. Now, what this allows you to do is remove as much milk as possible, and it's combining the step of breastfeeding and pumping. So what you would do is, like I said, get your baby on after you have this whole setup going, and have them latch and breastfeed like normal, and then you would supplement at the end of the pumping and breastfeeding. I did not do this one myself, so I can't speak from experience. To me, it seemed a little bit more overwhelming to juggle getting my pump going, having the cord all in the way of my baby while I'm holding him, and trying to get a good latch, and it just seemed like a lot of pieces for me, more than the SNS was, even though some people are really overwhelmed by all the tubes and stuff. It is something that I have heard, though, people who do this find it like a game changer. It's so easy for them. I personally struggled with my son to latch easily, where I had to help him latch quite a bit in the very beginning. And so that was something I really needed both hands available for, and just the thought of having a pump in the way, it just made it way more complicated in my mind. So I didn't even try it. But it is something that I would recommend that you experiment with between triple feeding and these two methods, the SNS and parallel pumping, and see what works for you. I will say, some people will say you can use a Haakaa, which is a Haakaa pump. It is a silicone pump. There's no electric anything to it. It's not a manual pump. You don't have to actually do anything. You literally just fold this back, and you would latch on by rolling it on. This is great, but I would not recommend it for parallel pumping. I've seen people use it for parallel pumping. Please do not, especially if you're struggling with a low milk supply, because if you use a Haakaa, it's just not as efficient, it's not as thorough, it's not as strong as an electric pump. Best practice would be a hospital grade pump for parallel pumping, but if you can't do that, then an electric pump would be fine. It's just a Haakaa is not going to give you the stimulation that you really need in order to try and increase your supply. It will help, it'll get some milk out, but it's not going to do what you really need. So I would not recommend using a Haakaa for parallel pumping. You can use it at other times, but this is something that I wanted to also address because I've seen people use it. So the key with parallel pumping is, again, hands-free bra, an electric pump. So that essentially, like I said, it takes out each of these methods. It kills two birds with one stone. So in my previous video, I talked about the method where essentially I combine feeding a supplement and pumping at the same time, and what you can essentially do for that is, it's not necessarily a set method, but my tip was to try and combine those. So the trick to making triple feeding easier, the trick to just minimizing all of the work that goes into this, is to stack and combine these different steps together, so that way you're doing them at the same time and you're able to be done faster. It's still doing all the same work, it's still doing the same necessary things that would need to happen in order for your supply to have that signal to be increased, right? Assuming that you're doing this at a minimum 8 times a day, then you will be able to, still achieve the same results, whatever those may be for you, by doing any of these combined methods. But this is just something that helps takes the edge off of doing 3 separate steps every hour, and such an exhausting rate every hour, every 2 hours. Some people can stretch it to every 3. Like I said, you're doing this a minimum 8 times a day. So that is my 2 alternatives to the triple feeding process that I'd recommend. And if you want that extra tip regarding supplementing and pumping at the same time, then definitely go back and watch the previous video. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Thanks for watching.